call the Education and Neighborhood Committee to order. It's Tuesday, June the 18th. I'm Bernard Parks, the chair. I do not believe we'll have the other two council members here, but we'll move forward on the agenda. And so we can call, and all for those who are not familiar with the workings of the committee, if you have a card you'd like to put in on a specific item, ensure you get it to us, so as we go through that item, you can be called. If you want to speak on something that is not on the agenda, but is within the jurisdiction of this committee, you make out a public comment card, and we'll have a session for just to make a public comment on any item that is not on the agenda, but is within the jurisdiction of this committee. So why don't we start off with item 1.
Item number 1 is a verbal report from the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment General Manager relative to various grant opportunities available to Dunn and neighborhood councils.
Good afternoon, Council Member. Gracie Liu, General Manager of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. Our department has been looking into the various grant opportunities that are out there. We have, thanks to CAO, we're looking at the Knights Foundation, which is a grant that is about open government and how we can perhaps use technology to make government more responsive to the local neighborhoods. The other grants that we're looking at is from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which is specifically in regards to civic participation. In the past, the department has received a grant for that. It assisted us in helping to design and redesign the website and make it more accessible to everyone in the community and to provide information via that website. Other than that, we are looking at other grants, but we have to take some time to research what the department actually needs. It's rather than running out there trying to find just grant funds, we're trying to assess, okay, well, what direction do we need to go in, and then what grants could possibly assist in that. I can tell you that I personally am interested in using any of the technology to help reach out and increase civic engagement. We've been looking at various companies and seeing how we can utilize them for neighborhood council outreach into the communities and to raise awareness about city government issues. I know we'll talk about this in a little later on the agenda, but particularly in like South LA and East LA, also addressing those issues of barriers to civic participation, specifically in those areas, and also in Northeast Valley. So until then, I don't have much more of an update on this agenda item.
Let me just ask on the issue of grants. Currently, under our current charter, are NDCs allowed to seek grants individually, or is it only through Dunn?
The neighborhood councils can seek grants. They do need to accept them through the city, and perhaps city attorney can go into the various ways. But we've had neighborhood councils apply for grants. I know specifically in downtown Los Angeles area, they did apply for a grant that helped them green their community. And so they have that opportunity now.
The other thing is that when you look at grants, is that inclusive, and I'm not even aware whether they're still going, is the beautification grants that the city was doing in Public Works, is that part of that research?
They used to actually apply for those grants. My understanding is that the funding has been severely limited for those beautification grants, so they are not available in the capacity that they were before. I believe it was $10,000 for a project. So we can look within the city to see what other resources there are, but my understanding is that those grants that had been available are not available anymore because of the fiscal situation of the city.
And you said basically we don't have a large number as a base to look at, but you're looking more in the technology area.
Well, I personally am interested in the technology end because I'm looking at various ways to do outreach, but for areas like East LA, South LA, the technology outreach may not necessarily be met with success because I think that there's some other fundamental barriers that we need to address in those areas. And I think that requires looking at a different type of grant. But I would like to, in reference to Councilmember Perry's request for a report, speak with those areas and assess better what they see as the barriers, because I have some ideas of what they are, but I obviously want to hear from them.
Okay. And then would the grants that you're aware of, are they going to require upfront money or matching funds, or are these generally the entire amount of the project you can seek a grant? So
the Knights Foundation is a matching grant, and actually the grant is due on July 1st. So we're trying to figure out, if this is actually feasible at this point, but maybe not this fiscal year, but next year. The Kellogg Grant is a grant that does not require matching funds, and they can provide funding directly.
Now, with our new checking account, remind me how we would administer those fundings if grant came in. They would just go into their checking account that is now set up for their disbursement from the city?
So currently, that wouldn't be the case. That would be at step 2. The neighborhood councils, we require a donation ordinance or some type of ordinance, I think, and again, I can get city attorney's opinion on this, to put these funds into their checking accounts. Right now, we could, if they were accepted through city council, a grant, I believe we would hold it at the department level. I wouldn't necessarily just put it right into their account. It would commingle the funds, and we don't have a system right now to track those separately.
Okay, but in the future, our goal is to basically have it to where it can be administered through their checking account?
That would be ideal. I don't know what the legalities of that would require, though. But ideally, yes, we would like to see that type of system.
All right. Okay, could we get a report back on that in our next meeting? Just a verbal.
Specifically on just various grants, or
Where are we on grants and how we're doing?
Sure.
And I understand that we're walking through this slowly, but just so we can keep track of it, that we get a report next, another verbal report of whether any of this has come to a conclusion.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Next item.
Item number 2, verbal report from Dunn General Manager relative to the 2014 Neighborhood Council elections.
So in regards to the department's work on the 2014 neighborhood council elections, we have notified the neighborhood councils in their budget package for next fiscal year. We've asked them to include the election costs that they might be incurring into their budgets, and just basically raising awareness that the elections are going to occur in spring of 2014. Some folks still think that it might be happening in the fall because that's the full 2-year cycle, but we are just trying to raise their awareness that no, it's in spring, and you need to start right now in calling your election committees together, start looking at outreach possibilities. So we've been going to all the alliance meetings and in our newsletters updating neighborhood councils on next steps for in preparation for the neighborhood council elections. The other thing we've done on our side is call our independent election administrators together. We had a meeting of poll workers and the IEAs, and started to go through the 2012 elections and see how we can do improved service for the neighborhood council elections. With city clerk, we have already worked out the budget aspect of the elections. They are focused on their on a special election for CD6 area, and then once they're completed with that, we can actually have further discussions and preparation for the 2014 neighborhood council elections. And also with the actual ordinance, doing the change, now that the budget has been resolved, city attorney's office will go ahead and start preparing the draft ordinance change.
Okay, now, the ordinance we're waiting for is basically identifying the separation of duties?
It's that, correct.
City clerk in your department.
Right, it's that in addition to who's lead on the elections, and it would basically be shifting back to the department to lead elections in conjunction with the administration with the city clerk.
Okay, so what did we do? Last time it was the Dunn, and now we're going to move it back, city clerk in conjunction with Dunn?
Yes, the city clerk had it actually during 2012 elections. They just were given the authority to have the department execute the 2012 elections. So then it reverted back to city clerk per the ordinance.
Okay. Now, do we have some strategic timelines that everybody should be gearing towards?
We do. You talk about the neighborhood councils or the department specifically?
The neighborhood councils gearing up for the next 2014 elections. Do we have a timeline that shows them when and how they should be getting prepared, and when does the two departments kick in as to what support this?
We'll be releasing that timeline likely over the summer once we are able to work collaboratively more with the city clerk's office. But in the meantime, what we have done is basically alert them to that the elections will start in March, and it will likely go in the order that it would in last time, so with the Valley going first, and that they need to update or call together their election committees or their outreach committees to start that conversation. On the department side, we are ramping up outreach on our side to kind of model what they should be doing. Each month, we're focusing on different areas such as schools, libraries, like how do you increase outreach into those areas? So we're leading in that sense for outreach efforts. And we've been, at the Alliance meetings, we've been passing out information about elections and what they need to be doing. I have a copy of that if you would like to see that.
I'm just wondering, what I'd like to be able to do is, at an appropriate time, publish something that tells neighborhood councils, here's the game plan for 2014 elections, so that there's no misinformation. Here's where you're going to have to, candidates are going to have to do this, Dunn is going to do this, the outreach should start here, those kind of things, so we can have it in a one report that gives them a template that when they get it, they can know how elections are going to be going for 2014.
Okay. We're happy to put that together, and I will
When
reach...
would that, I mean, when you're going to meet with the city clerk during the summer?
Yeah, I would hopefully be meeting with them in July,
Okay.
and release something possibly in August that is more definitive. In the meantime, we've just been working with neighborhood councils, just saying, pull your committees together and start thinking about this.
Now, once we publish, if you publish something in August, it's not going to be outdated before election date.
No.
All right. And so if we can look at, I mean, because things such as, I think it would be important to have one report that tells the neighborhood councils what the duties of the city clerk are going to be, what the duties of Dunn are going to be, so it lays out, the timeline that we expect the elections, when the elections are going to be held, what month. Like you said, the timeline where you had before, first groups will be the Valley, and then segment 2, segment 3.
Mm-hmm.
So people will have the whole game plan for 2014, and that's something that can be published, sent through council, put on the webpage, sent to the neighborhood councils, and they know months in advance what to expect.
Okay.
Okay. So if we can figure
we'll work that out.
That we could have a written report in August? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, August. Okay, so we'll look at that. The next item?
Item number 3 is a verbal status report from the city attorney and Dunn general manager pursuant to motion Weezer Parks relative to current policy and potential policy changes whereby neighborhood councils might exercise their right under the neighborhood council system to petition the BONC for a subdivision or to otherwise adjust their boundaries in order to increase or reduce their size for purpose of better representation.
No, we're on 3?
That's,
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
that's 4.
You just tested me to see if I read.
Yes, I was just testing you. Item number 3 is a verbal status report from the city attorney and Dunn general manager pursuant to motion Weezer Parks and 2011-12 adopted budget recommendation and Board of Neighborhood Commissioners to report relative to recommendations for standardizing the factual basis stakeholder definition, qualifications, and documentation.
The Board of Neighborhood Commissioners met on this issue yesterday, and after months of working with the plan review committees throughout the city, they took action to make a change in the stakeholder definition, particularly in regards to the factual basis portion of the definition. And in essence, they removed the factual basis language from the definition, and they added instead that stakeholders would be those that live, work, own property in the neighborhood, but also include those who are community interest stakeholders, and those are defined as people who affirm a substantial and ongoing participation within the neighborhood council boundaries, and who may be in a community organization such as, but not limited to, educational, nonprofit, and religious. So they did provide some more specification, and this change in the definition that they took action on would require city council action, and I believe the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners will be writing a letter to that effect to city council. I know Council Member Weezer has been tracking this closely as well, and he may, on his side, make changes to the motion that he currently has before City Council.
Let me ask you, what always comes down to the final analysis is how does a person prove that other definition? If you work somewhere or if you live somewhere, it's one thing, but how do you prove the community interest that's ongoing?
The substantial and ongoing community interest. We actually discussed this yesterday a little bit. What the department is hoping from city attorney is looking at possible case law that would define or give parameters for the term substantial and ongoing, and utilizing that create I guess what is necessary in terms of election time. What would we need from you to show substantial and ongoing? And this actually would only apply to those neighborhood councils in terms of voters that require documentation, because if they are self-affirming, then they can self-affirm, and there's no need for documentation. But for
Hold that again now? I didn't understand that.
so with the voters, so during election time, all candidates have to provide the department documentation that they are qualified to be candidates for the position they're running for. With voters, neighborhood councils have the option of choosing self-affirmation or documentation.
Self-affirmation is check a box.
Correct. Basically, in essence, like, I am this person, and I swear that I am under penalty of perjury, that I have these qualifications. Documentation was the issue that we had during the last election cycle with what people termed the Starbucks voter or the one purchase voter, where they just go buy something, bring a receipt in, and say, I have a factual basis, and this is my documentation. So depending on the case law, if there is case law regarding substantial and ongoing participation, we would craft something. It would likely kind of go back to what it was before. My understanding is for community organizations, people would just bring a letter stating that this person has this relationship with this community organization, and that would be enough to documentation to justify their position.
Because one of the things that and hopefully the city attorney will be looking at it, is that we just had a major Supreme Court case came down on state elections, that you can't ask for more information than required on a federal registration form, which is you basically say, yes, I'm a citizen or whatever. You don't have to bring them one sheet of paper and verify that. And so I don't know whether we'd be in the same box with neighborhood councils.
Deputy City Attorney Darren Martinez, we'll certainly look at it, but the initial kind of analysis or the elections with federal and state systems are entirely separate from neighborhood council elections, so there is a lot more flexibility in some cases in administering the neighborhood council elections.
Because I would hope after 10 or 12 years of being in business that we can finally put what is a stakeholder to rest and not have grievances and all that other stuff and people still debating as to who can come to meetings and vote on meetings. And I think after 10 or 12 years we should really zero in on what doesn't cause more grievances,
Yes.
but in essence allows people to come, vote, and participate without a great deal of afterthought or lawsuits and all the other stuff we've gone through.
I agree. I would like that as well. And I think ultimately now this new definition will rely on how we can clarify substantial and ongoing participation.
And this, you said this wording is pretty much the way it used to be before we got into the this other term of state basic factual basis.
Well, it wasn't. They didn't word it that way, but I think in practice that's basically what folks were looking at. Do you have? Are you with when they had the educational, nonprofit, or religious seats? They looked at, okay, is it ongoing, and are they participating in these organizations? But that exact language was not written.
Okay, but also when they is this going to come as that package of recommendations from the committee, or is this going to come singularly?
I believe it will come by itself. The other recommendations are still being vetted by the commission. So they've put forth this one because it will affect elections.
Okay, I see. All right.
Right.
So this requires also an ordinance that doesn't require a charter change, just an ordinance.
Just an ordinance change and plan change.
When do we expect the larger committee report to be coming?
The larger commission report is pending on at least one more meeting from the plan review committees. They basically met separately, came up with recommendations, and then they met collectively one time to settle any discrepancies between the committee recommendations. They basically spent that first meeting on the stakeholder definition for the most part. And then now they will meet again this Saturday and try to resolve the other issues, the other pending issues.
So we can expect the clarity from the city attorney and their recommendation on the factual basis stakeholder by what, July, August?
I don't know what the time frame for that. I know that Councilmember Huizar's office wanted to move pretty quickly after the commission took action on this yesterday. So I think it would depend on his lead on that. And then the commission will be writing their letter as well.
Okay. Let's see if we can schedule it for July, if we can have everything together for July meeting. Okay. Next item.
Item number 4 is a...
Is this from the department?
Yes, we put this together to show the changes, yes.
Item number 4 is a verbal status report from the city attorney and the Dunn general manager pursuant to motion Huizar Parks relative to the current policy and potential policy changes whereby neighborhood councils might exercise their right under the neighborhood council system to petition bond for a subdivision or to otherwise adjust their boundaries in order to increase, reduce their size for purpose of better representation.
The Board of Neighborhood Commissioners hasn't taken action on this particular item yet. The Plan Review Committees have discussed this. They are supposed to finalize this discussion on Saturday as to their final recommendation to the Commission. And the general feeling, though, is that there should be some type of subdivision. I think we'll have to, when the Commission takes this up, have to look into funding matters and how that would work out if existing neighborhood councils were allowed to subdivide into smaller neighborhood councils.
Now, what I didn't understand in looking at the motion is that when they say subdivisions, is that a standing neighborhood council, or are they going to be several smaller divisions within a neighborhood council?
Well, neighborhood councils currently can have internal boundaries where they make regions within their boundaries. This doesn't affect their funding, though, because they're still considered that one neighborhood council.
Okay, but the key here is it appears they want to see if, after operational concerns, whether they want to reduce the size of the neighborhood council or expand the size. We
Correct.
just received, I think they referred to it as an orphan district that
Yes.
wasn't a part of any neighborhood council, and now with redistricting it's moved into the 8th district. So that's the kind of thing we would be looking at, is to them being absorbed in a neighboring neighborhood council.
Well, a subdivision, the orphan areas are different because they didn't really belong to any neighborhood council, so that's just a boundary adjustment to include them into a neighborhood council, existing neighborhood council. For subdivisions, it's one neighborhood council that perhaps, I'll take, for example, one of the neighborhood councils has 95,000 people within their boundaries. They may want to subdivide because they feel like they're not as effective trying to service one neighborhood, that whole community. And if they subdivide, there's the issue of, well, what do you do with that funding? Because then in one neighborhood council then becomes two neighborhood councils, and are they going to each get a full allocation? And I know you had the recommendation that if they were to get allocations, that wouldn't start till the next fiscal year, and I think that's a good recommendation, because we don't know what neighborhood councils would come forward to ask for subdivisions.
Yeah. Well, now, so when we use the term subdivision, we're actually talking about an existing neighborhood council that wants to change its boundaries and create or divide it or create another neighborhood council.
That's the way the conversation has been going, specifically
What about-
one becoming two or three or however many.
So is the same discussion about absorbing territory and maybe becoming a larger neighborhood council? Or is it only...
It's different, yeah. That's more of a boundary adjustment where even between two neighborhood councils, they can say, well, you know what, I don't necessarily, it seems weird for us to represent this group in this area. Can you take this group? And we actually have a boundary adjustment application coming up before the Commission that is addressing that very issue. The problem with subdivision, or when subdivision comes into play, is if an area wants to perhaps leave an existing neighborhood council, or the neighborhood council itself decides that it can't be effective as one big neighborhood council, then subdivision comes into play.
Okay. But on the reverse, if you have a boundary change, does that alter funding if you lose a portion of your district into another neighborhood council? Does that alter any one of their funds?
No, currently it doesn't, because the funding is not based on the population of that area. It's based on a strict allocation that is given, the same amount that's given throughout the 95 neighborhood councils.
But subdivision can affect funding.
Correct, it can. If it depends on how, I guess city council decides to fund. If an existing neighborhood council breaks into two separate neighborhood councils, would you just give same 37,000, ask them to split it? Or if they truly are two neighborhood councils, then it makes sense that they would each get their own allocation. So I think ultimately it depends on I guess the city's fiscal state and what's available.
It would appear that we'd have to have some substantial guidelines on subdivision, because you can people could play with it and just create more finances for smaller districts, but the overall larger district would benefit. So it looks like there should be some fairly substantial guidelines on subdivision with no impact on revenue. Boundary adjustments would have to have guidelines, but maybe not as stringent.
Correct. The boundary adjustment guidelines are already in the plan. The subdivision isn't. So the way the committees have been speaking on this for the review, the plan review, they have basically looked at, well, if you're trying to subdivide, then you should, and it creates a new council, then that area that would create a new council should be able to meet the criteria of certifying as its own neighborhood council. That criteria is already in the plan.
Okay, so that would be the logical default, is that if you're going to subdivide, then both should meet the requirements of a new neighborhood council.
Right.
Now, do we have any, I know that we have the motion, but do we have councils that are requesting this now?
We do have an area within Arroyo Seco Neighborhood Council that has requested to subdivide, but because there has not been any policy or procedure for them to do so or any authority, they have not been able to do that.
And what part of the city is that?
That's in Councilmember Huizar's area.
So then, what is there a legal issue that we're trying to resolve before we get to that recommendation, or is it just a matter of creating a process?
I think it was a matter of creating process. I know the Neighborhood Council Review Commission also looked at this, and I think City Attorney will have more.
Excuse me, Councilmember, Deputy City Attorney Darren Martinez. One of the issues that came up is that neighborhood councils had a desire to form 2 or 3 neighborhood councils. The process that currently exists is they would have to voluntarily decertify themselves and then come forward with 2 certification applications. That would then, of course, be a very timely process. It's taken up to a year, 2 years for some neighborhood councils to become certified. So what they wanted was a process where they wouldn't be out of their funding for that time period, and they could, in a sense, then have 2 neighborhood councils form from one, which would be like a divorce, a creation of two separate entities again.
But again, if we fall back on the default position that when they make their request, both of them have to meet the guidelines of a new neighborhood council.
That's correct.
Okay. So, I mean, is that the answer when they make that suggestion, or do we need more process?
Well, there may be more process that has to be considered because some people are talking about whether this is going to come from the organization itself or whether, in other words, board generated. The board wants this to occur, or if the stakeholders can somehow file a petition and create the process itself. So there's a number of different factors that are going to have to kind of be considered and analyzed in who can make the request, how's the request made, and what's basically the resulting the end product of that decision.
And the final decision would be what, the councils? As far as if you created a 98th neighborhood council?
Well, I suspect what we would have to do is some type of commission. We would probably have the commission make that determination on whether it approves this split, and then, yes, it would be a new neighborhood council added.
With that, then the recommendations of funding and everything else goes with it.
Correct.
Right. But my understanding, though, is that the ordinance still has to be, there has to be an ordinance to allow for this, right?
Correct.
Right. And then at that point, I think when the ordinance comes before City Council, that, the options for funding would have to be considered. I mean, in all likelihood, there could be significant amounts of significant numbers of neighborhood councils that could decide to subdivide and could easily raise our number of neighborhood councils to, 50, 60 more if they decided to do that. So it's something to consider.
So where are we now? You're going to evaluate this and come with recommendations from the department, or is it going to come from the commission?
It's coming from the commission. The department only weighs in terms of our staff capacity to do some of the work that would be required to do subdivision. I know that there's one of the plan review committees asked for, as part of the process, that if someone requests to subdivide, that the department would hold an election in that area for the stakeholders to actually weigh in on whether or not they would want to have this subdivision. So, we weighed in on our staff ability to whether we could do that and how we can do that without hurting our other work duties.
Okay, and so what do we think on timing that we'd have that flushed out?
I'm hoping that the committees that are coming together on Saturday will settle this issue, and then it will go before the commission at that point for a final determination. And I don't know when the commission will be scheduling this. I'm assuming they will schedule it as soon as they can.
Okay, why don't we just ask for a verbal report next meeting?
Okay.
And if it's been resolved, then we can quickly turn that into a written report. Okay, next item.
Item number 5 is adopted budget recommendation relative to an instruction for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to report on how to address the equity of funding between neighborhoods considering the desperate level of resources available to communities pursuant to adoption of the fiscal year 2013-14 budget on May 23, 2013.
So the department is looking into this this request for this report. I think that Councilmember Perry picked up on an issue that is definitely problematic in South LA and also in East LA areas and Northeast Valley. That's some of the barriers to civic participation. Given our workload to try to close out the existing funding program and launch a new funding program, we haven't been able to put the time into this, the background work into this report as we would like to. So we'll be turning to this likely in July, August, and reaching out to those communities to identify some of the barriers and possible solutions so that we can collaborate with them in doing a bottom-up type of solution problem solving, and then provide you a report at that point.
Let me ask you, what I was confused on looking at the motion is that, are we saying that there are neighborhood councils that run out of money and can't continue to perform at a level, or are we just saying that they're using their funds but not getting the number of people to participate as we think it would be appropriate?
I think Councilmember Perry had, it's more of the latter, that they are getting funds, but because of there are other issues going on in South LA, even like the basics of childcare and translation, is it equitable to expect that communities that are tackling these types of issues, should they have the same amount of funds as other neighborhood councils where these might not be factors? And how do we make the funding equitable so that it can address these barriers of civic participation that they have? So in order for us to do that, I think, we do need to go into that community and say, like, from the department side, we see that there's been issues here and quorum, lack of quorum issues, and people who can't just get to meetings because of the times that they're being held. What is like the underlying issue to you guys, all the neighborhood councils doing the work that we need neighborhood councils to do? And from there, try to see if funding can be a way to, provide resources, whether it's be capacity building or leadership training, or just the basics of paying to make sure they have a translator there, and paying to make sure there's childcare available when the parents are attending these meetings.
Yeah. One thing, before we consider, say, additional funding, I think we talked several months ago about establishing some criteria or guidelines on how their budgets should be spent. And I think that's one of the things that came to light during the last election cycle. Everybody was spending money on outreach, and the concern was is that if you're running a neighborhood council that's functional, outreach should be less of concern if people are showing up all the time. And so it was a matter of, I think early on, we talked about the prospects of having some guidelines, of giving people some broad guidelines on how funding should be dispersed or allocated, so that you didn't have those that were spending the money on nice to do and let's have a banquet at every meeting, versus others that say, I want to do infrastructure, but you'd set up some guidelines for allocation that may also drive participation.
Yes, we did discuss that. I think that the problem that we've had in regards to outreach is the term is so vague. Like, what is considered outreach? If I have food at a neighborhood council meeting because most people come straight from work and they don't have, a chance to eat, and they basically would decide, well, we're not going to come because I can't. I need some food, so I can concentrate on what's going on in the meeting. Is that outreach? And for some folks, that is outreach. That's how they bring their stakeholders in. They provide that opportunity so that they can actually participate. That would be along the same lines of, like, what would you consider childcare to be outreach? If that would actually bring people into your meetings, if you provided childcare, then yeah, that could be considered outreach. It's hard to make these calls, and I don't know if it's necessarily the department's call. I think it's one of those things where we can see when something's not working, and we can say, okay, well, that's not working. So, but in terms of like the ideal solution and what qualifies into what types of categories of funding, that starts getting a little bit harder. Every neighborhood council needs something different. If we were to provide even percentage guidelines, I think it would harm the system more than help the system, because some neighborhood councils work very effectively just by hiring an assistant to help them process their paperwork. But you may say, okay, well, why would you spend $10,000 on an assistant to help you process paperwork? But it makes them effective, then, shouldn't they be allowed to do that? So it's a larger issue and a larger discussion that we definitely do need to have at some point.
And I think one of the things we in meeting with neighborhood councils across the city, the thing that stood out is that a number of them thought it was a successful meeting if just the board met and there was no one else in the room, which I thought was strange. I mean, so then it would clearly reflect why they had an outreach problem at election time. If the board's meeting as an inclusive group, as opposed to having members of the community there to monitor what was going on.
Right,
So,
right.
I agree, this needs a lot more thought. One of the things I would not like to do is circumvent the rollover policy. So where, we get that
Yes.
end of the year fiendish thing, will let me allocate money, and then we find out that it's merely putting a hold on it so I can get it next year.
Right.
And that then just adds work to your operation.
Right. I think if anything, it could be set up much like the Congress and the neighborhood budget advocates, how they set up the one account. We were able to set up that one account, and the funds rolled specifically into that account, and had specific use only to withdraw from that account. So, for instance, if you had an account just for translation interpretation, that would be something that the neighborhood councils could apply for, and we would review their application and provide that information. So that funding. So that would be another way to look at funding, as opposed to just a random rollover, or giving one neighborhood council who may be having functionality issues more money if they can't even, spend down or appropriately spend down their current allocation. Why would you just give them more money, hoping that they would be able to somehow, function better?
So you would be looking at a centralized fund that would deal, say, with interpreting services for everyone.
Right. So different areas of the city, some of them spend up to $15,000 of their allocation just on interpretation and translation. So those neighborhood councils should be provided that consideration. If there were to be excess funds that are not used at the end of the fiscal year, that perhaps some of these funds could be diverted into these types of accounts.
Why don't we basically get a verbal report in 60 days on
Okay.
what you found out, and so that we're not taxing your resources, but we can determine just how we can address that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Next item.
Item number 6 is adopted budget recommendation relative to instruction to the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to report on other forms of neighborhood councils that exist around the world, and for the report to address what best practices can be applied in Los Angeles pursuant to adoption of the budget 2013-14, May 23rd, 2013.
So Councilmember Labange requested this report during the
The guest.
budget budget hearings. And it is actually a good information to have. It will take us time to compile this information, though, and to do such an analysis. There aren't any systems that are like the current the Los Angeles Neighbor Council system in terms of that they're part of the charter and that they have an advisory role. We can go and look for similar systems. I recently returned from Neighborhoods USA, where it's a national and actually international, because they had some folks from outside the country come in too, where neighbor councils are bridging that gap between government and the community. But their councils were more like neighborhood associations. Some of them didn't receive funding. Most of them actually didn't receive any types of funding. The ones that did receive government funding were more like beautification, community beautification programs, not necessarily like weighing in on council files and issues. But we will do a further analysis on this. The one that might be the closest to us is the one in Nagoya, Japan, which they actually came and studied our program and modeled the program that they have based on our program.
And so the thing is that, again, like you said, there's very few that would have funding or that structure. And so you'd have to be looking at something like a hybrid of what's out there as relates to community participation.
Right.
Because right here in the city, the police department has had in place 100 years, community advisory councils.
Yes.
And so there's kind of a sounding board for the local community.
Right.
And before that, you had block clubs and neighborhood, that kind of thing, and team police, all that stuff generated right out of the city. But I don't think anyone's adopted as formal program as we have.
That's correct. And yeah, we would be looking at those types of historical programs, and then again, it ends up ultimately being how do we effectively incorporate community input, and that again is something that the Neighborhoods USA was looking at too, and so we were looking at technology and how do we incorporate and become the next evolution of government, where it's easier to get community to provide input and to be knowledgeable about the city, state, federal government issues. So we will be looking into that, and we can provide you a report with that as well later on. I would say give us a couple months.
Yeah, the thing is, if we put that off to like 90 days, but I think the issue is just from my district, what is always a concern is people being aware and access to information. Where we also find there's a major difference of opinion is that many people don't want to join anything.
Yeah.
They believe, as Mrs. Smith on East 47th Street, their voice is just as important if they belong to an organization. And so that's where you get disparity of people's opinion. But it seems to be universal that everybody is seeking information, and then you have the debate whether everything electronic, people don't have access to computers, who and how do you communicate with those without technology, how do you get them over to the libraries to get to the internet, things of that nature are the common thread of, just like we've dealt in this committee, how do we know about something that's going on in council, and you get people trained to go on the city council file and find out about an item and then get notified when that item moves, as opposed to just saying it's on the agenda and I don't know anything about it. But I
Right.
think that's going to be the big key, is how do you use technology and other sources to educate the community about what's going on, because only a handful of people read newspapers, only a handful have access to computers, a variety of things that keep people from being made aware. But again, if we try to formalize all their participation, that's where you're going to get the disparity of people saying, I'm in a block club, I don't want to be in a neighborhood council.
Right.
Or I just want to be citizen and deal with the issues in my neighborhood.
Right.
So that's where I think we're going to find a major difficulty of trying to formalize their participation. But if there's a way we can educate on a more broad basis, I think we've gone a long way.
I definitely agree with that. I think, obviously, as you mentioned, there are various ways people participate or choose not to participate. And I think that any recommendations that we get are going to have a multi-pronged approach to reach all different types of stakeholders. You can't just rely on even just technology. You can't just rely on technology just because, as you mentioned, there are areas that just don't utilize or won't utilize it. So it always has to be, multidisciplinary approach in terms of how do you get people activated.
Okay. All right, so we'll get a verbal report back in 90 days.
Item number 7 is a report from Dunn relative to recommendations for a neighborhood council system grievance policy and process, also referred to Budget and Finance Committee.
So this report about the grievance policy and process is from November of 2011, and it came from a council file number that Councilmember Krikorian wanted to examine, and it was specifically to address the issue where neighbor councils were filing grievances that were not being heard by the neighbor council themselves, and it would result in ongoing complaints to all levels of the city government. And in the system itself, there is a bit of a confusion in the plan for citywide system of neighborhood councils. There is a grievance process and a complaint process, which are separate. The complaint process comes to the department. A grievance goes to the neighborhood council to resolve. Because of this confusion, the department went out and did significant outreach to neighborhood councils and stakeholders and asked them to weigh in on what they would like to see in a new system that would address these issues. And they ultimately, the feedback that we got was that they wanted a regional grievance panel system, and this would be populated by volunteers from within the system. And the issue that ultimately came down to it was whether there would be an appeal process from this regional grievance panel, or whether once they provided their determination, that would be their determination, and that would be it. There was no appeal process. So the report basically provides the information that was gathered at that point, not only from the stakeholders and board members, but from the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners, also from the VANC and the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils, the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council Coalition, the South LA Alliance of Neighborhood Councils too. And this issue is actually being brought before the plan review committees as well, and I'm hoping that they will be able to provide more input too.
Mm-hmm. So this will be a part of their larger report.
Well, what I'm hoping is that they will include it within their report, their plan review, their ultimate report to the commission.
Okay. Now, the one thing we heard, and again, there's a lot of misinformation as to what the difference between a complaint and a grievance. And in many instances, what we found in talking to several neighborhood councils, the grievance issue is I just disagree with the decision.
Yes.
And it's not that they were not within their purview to make the decision, it's that people are viewing it, I don't agree with it. So therefore, we carry on this long process trying to satisfy their discontent when in effect, it's within the purview of the board to have made that decision.
We do try to clarify that within the grievances, that it can't be about the actual decision. It has to be about some error in procedure, policy, or the bylaws. So that's already there, but a lot of times those who are grieving, you're right, they don't like the decision and they're trying to find another way to get around it. But the problem with some of the grievances going back to the neighborhood councils is that those who perhaps, did violate the procedure process are sometimes the ones that are reviewing the grievance, and there was this, whether or not it was actually fair for them to be, or, appropriate for those who are being complained about to actually review grievances. I think that this regional grievance panel would, resolves that matter because they use people who are not associated or know about that neighborhood council issues to resolve the grievances that are coming out of there.
Would that group come from your office, or is that something that they create internally?
We would be the administrators of the new process, in that we would help set it up and then make sure all the timelines are being adhered to. I know in the original report that we requested staff to do a project coordinator to do that, but at this point we wouldn't need that. I can absorb those functions within the existing staff. But the department, again, would only be doing administrative work on this, and the issues would be resolved via the grievance panel.
Okay, so we can expect that this will become a part of the larger...
Yes, I'm hoping that it will become part of the larger report.
All right. So we should just hold on to this until they finalize their work? If it doesn't become part of the report, then we'd have to deal with it individually?
That's correct.
Okay, so why don't we just hold on to this and continue it until after the commission's overall report is done?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Okay. Next, item 8.
Item number 8 is a motion, Weezer Rosendahl, relative to the installation of signs identifying the existing community of Rose Hills.
Okay, this is not naming a community, this is just signs that identify a existing community.
Yes.
We have a number of cards. I understand we have some young people here from school that may have to go back. And let me ask if we could, before you leave, if we can just have those in the audience that are for this recommendation, if you'd stand at this time, and then we'll bring the speakers up. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, thank you. And do we have anyone that's opposed? You can all sit down, thank you. Have anyone that's opposed? Okay, we have 3 people that oppose. You have all put in, those who want to speak and put in cards? Because right now, I think we only have 1 opposition card. Let me make sure. Okay, and let me say thanks to the students for being here. We don't want to have you late for school and miss an assignment. And so appreciate you being here and get a chance to see how government works and continue to participate. So thank you very much. Okay, why don't we start off with the cards before we bring we have 2 cards against, is it Yoli Garcia and George Garcia? Come up at the table here.
Hello, good afternoon to all of you.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I I was born and raised in the city of LA. I'm a very proud resident, a proud Angelino, a proud resident of our community of El Cerrito. And I'm here today to ask this committee to please clarify the purpose of this motion. Is this motion to recognize and approve Rose Hills as an official community? Or is it simply to install 3 community signs? I'm asking for clarification because today's agenda states motion relative to the installation of signs identifying the existing community of Rose Hills. Yet, the motion itself states the community is currently in the process of restoring its rightful place. So has this community of Rose Hills been officially recognized and approved by City Council? If this community is not officially recognized by City Council, I ask this committee to please table this item until the community is officially recognized by the City of LA. And if this community has been officially recognized by City Council, I'm exercising my right and requesting under California Public Record Act the documentation verifying when Rose Hills became officially recognized by City Council, and also to define its boundaries. To this day, I have no idea what the boundaries of Rose Hills are. I have asked for them, and I have received nothing. We've asked Councilman Member Jose Huizar's office, and we haven't received anything. So until this is clarified, I'm asking for no action to take place in regards to the installation of signs. I respectfully ask you to take this item and recommend the proper process of naming or renaming a community. I saw that Mr. Martel from Councilman Huizar's office is here. Councilmember Jose Huizar is the mover of this motion. Perhaps he could clarify more on the true purpose of this motion. Is it, again, as I said, is it to designate it as an official recognized community, or is it to install signs?
Okay, from what I can read, it appears it's been a recognized community for decades.
Okay, because then the agenda is only asking for installations of signs. So is there a Brown Act violation if we go into it asking for it to be officially recognized as a community?
Well, I think we can only deal with what's on the agenda, and from what I can see on the motion and the notes that we have is that it's recognizing, and that's why I asked the question initially, it's recognizing the existing community, and it appears the community has been in place for decades. So it's a matter of putting signs. Let me ask, does Mr. Huizar have someone here?
Mr. Martel is here.
Because the thing is that on the motion, it actually gives some boundaries. I'm assuming that's where the signs go, but I assume that the community is larger than what's designated by the signs.
Eric Martello from Councilmember Jose Huizar's office. Those locations were stated because those are the actual DOT signs that were actually placed up in the late 1990s, early 2000s during Councilmember Alatorre's tenure there. So since then, there's been vandalism and signs have been taken down, but these are the signs that the City of LA DOT department has actually already approved and processed when these community signs were being placed throughout the city of Los Angeles.
So you're replacing existing signs?
Correct, and we're also clarifying the actual locations of where they're at. Because DOT I've personally contacted the Department of Transportation, and during the list of areas of these signs going up, the department did not take a proper protocol in observing where these signs actually went up. So we're just clarifying for them an approved process.
Okay, let me ask this to the LA's office. On dealing with existing communities and replacing signs that have already been designated, is there a requirement of signatures or anything to warrant that
No,
new signs?
no,
This is
no,
not a new community,
no.
and we're putting signs where they already exist. Is that clear?
That's our understanding, yes.
Is that
That is true, and also to be Councilmember Huizar to be proactive, actually required the Rose Hills community to actually submit signatures, which they've submitted for the record, about 314 through a 6-year process. Unfortunately, we try to have them do the 500 signatures, which is actually required by the city clerk's office to rename or a different process, but there's actually an exemption to the city clerk's policy to grandfather an existing community, which we're doing, and that's why the motion was submitted.
and there's no overlap of boundaries?
No. There's also letters of support from the neighborhood council and surrounding neighborhood councils and also local elected officials that have recognized the area for years.
Okay, and the original name, and I don't want to butcher it, Rosa de Castilla?
Yeah, in Spanish. Yeah, the original back in the 1800s, but it's commonly known as Rose Hills.
Okay. Okay. And then what is the neighborhood council that it encompass?
It's in LA 32. So the LA 32 encompasses within that bigger neighborhood council. It's divided within separate communities, which is Hillside Village, University Hills, Rose Hills. I'm forgetting the other portion. University Hills.
Okay. Now, did you say earlier that there was signatures collected? What happened to those signatures?
Oh, we actually they're going to be submitted for the council file for this. Yeah, there it is. And there's also actually the picture of the DOT signs that were actually in place prior to them being vandalized and bringing down.
And the signatures were collected prior to you becoming aware they were not necessary.
They were not necessary, but the council office required them to submit signatures of support as well.
Okay. Let me ask, is George here? What's going on? Thank you very much. Okay.
I'm sorry.
There he goes.
Okay, number one, this community, so-called community of Rose Hills, where's the map of the boundaries? If it's been there for years, as they say, Wizard's map of the communities that are in that area only shows that Sereno. So how is it that all of a sudden they figured that it's been there, but no one knows the boundaries? That's just empowering for the community to have these signs that are posted in 3 areas. Straight line, 100 Drive and Collis. Over here is Soto, Marengo. It's a straight line. And Mission Soto. And then over here is Monterey Park, Monterey Road, and over here is Collis. So it's like a triangle. It's like this. It's one sign here, one sign here on Monterey Road, and one over here. So
Is your concern that it doesn't encompass the entire community?
it doesn't define boundaries for a community. So people will be disempowered. People that grew up in El Sereno, that's what it's called, El Sereno. This is what it is, El Sereno, officially, as a community, so El Sereno. This is official, Wizard's official map of El Sereno. So we're questioning, when did this evidence, become present, to the community? When was it shared with everybody there so that they knew it's going to be changed? Nobody knows about this. We submitted emails to people on community one day, yesterday, and overnight, 5 people to the area emailed back in support of the signs not being installed. Those are part of the council file, submitted council file.
Richard Williams, City Clerk. Yes, I received those emails, and they have been distributed to the committee.
That's only one day of outreach. The thing is that this has not been shared with the community, that this will be a division.
Okay, but-
They don't know, and that's not fair for them. We want the process to be done correctly, not,
Are you saying that the 500 signatures that were received are not accurate?
they're not 500, first of all.
Pardon?
They're not 500, they're only 300 something.
Okay. I mean, are you saying these are not accurate?
Well, community is larger than that. I mean, there's 40,000 plus residents in that community, in El Sereno. So how can 300 define what 40,000 have to say?
Okay.
Plus,
Just
I'm sorry.
ask this, Mr. Rezar's deputy would come up again. Is there a specific map or that you can show boundaries of this community?
No, there isn't an official map. That's why when we asked BOE to clarify exactly what the Rose Hills community encompass, we got from the department that we should actually state the actual map. So the map that he's referring to is just a map that is actually used by the neighborhood council system of what LA 32, which the neighborhood council that these 4 neighborhoods that exist within the greater El Sereno community.
So so I understand it. El Sereno is the larger community.
Correct.
Within that, there's sub-communities.
Correct.
That have clear identification, but they're part of the larger El Sereno community.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about.
Correct.
So
If I may?
We'll give you a couple of seconds more.
This map doesn't show anything except El Sereno. One community. it's not the NC's map, it's the Councilman Huizar's map from his office that we got. And you can go online and get it. It's online. It doesn't say the NC. It says El Sereno. And also BOE. We wrote to them about what their process they had to define a community to be grandfathered. They replied, and that's on file. We don't have a process for doing that. That's a mistake that was put in there. We don't have a process to define the community or to grandfather one. So that's on record that they don't have a process. Why would you ask them for something that they don't legally, entirely do? Makes no sense.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me ask those, we're going to move this forward with the recommendation that we paste those signs. For those who gave cards, you have a choice if I can read your name in the file, or you can come up and speak, because we're going to move it forward with a recommendation. Well, we can't do recommendation. Send a letter. What is it?
At this point, Richard Williams, City Clerk, the committee can, or the chair can approve the motion.
Approve the motion.
To send it forward to council for consideration or take another action.
Okay.
One final thing. As you can tell, we made this committee go through an extensive process, and when we submitted the motion back in 2011, redistricting occurred, and actually portions of neighborhood signs that would be affected in the City 1 side has now been encumbered by City 14. So we also wanted to amend as to where the other locations that we recently just got through redistricting to place the signs as well, if I can read it to in the record.
By the time it comes to council, could we end up with something that clarifies that?
Correct. Yeah, I will do that. But I just want to say for the record, for the supporters that are here, so the other sign would be on Mission at Broadway, placed north of Broadway on the east side of the street, and the other one would be on Mercury at Reno, placed east of Reno on the south side of the street.
That's 5 signs.
Correct.
Okay.
Total. Thank you.
Total 5. No, I think we've done it. I think we've done it.
May I add something?
No, we're going to go. Let me just say, for those who put a card in for the proposal, it's your choice. I'm going to call your name. If you just feel you have to speak, come on up to the microphone. If you feel as though your name in the record is sufficient, because we're going to make a recommendation to send this forward with the approval of the motion. Okay? That's John Carbajal. If you need to speak, come to the microphone. Anthony Manzano. You need to speak. Joseph Manzano. Elena Chang. Got enough mic? Now let me just repeat that. We're going to approve this and send it to council.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you just have to speak, you're on.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Bernard Parks. My name is John Carbajal. I'm a 25-year resident of the beautiful community we are honoring today, Rose Hills. For many years, actually, as far as I can remember, this community has been persistently trying to increase the quality of life of its residents. Because of our geographic location, being located between Lincoln Heights and El Sereno, has added extra hurdles to exhibit our community's presence. For years, this community has long been overlooked. Many of our resources sought to enhance roads, parks, and schools have been non-existent. Well, our community has had enough. It's time for a change. Many of our residents have come together and drafted many ideas as to how to make our community a more efficient and prosperous place to live. We are cognizant of our environment and the beautiful hillsides and open space that lie amongst us. I want to personally thank our honorable council member, Jose Huizar, and his entire staff for taking this forgotten gem of a community out of its shadows and placing us on a level platform together with our neighboring communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Councilmember Bernard Parks. Good day. My name is Anthony Manzano, and I'm going to be very brief, just like my neighbor here, Johnny Carbajal. Basically, I just want to help out and assist you guys with some of the facts. The facts are that in 1981, Mayor Tom Bradley had placed a cornerstone of the original Pueblo commemorating the 200 years founding from 1781. That cornerstone sits on Monterey Road in the community of Rose Hills. That cornerstone is not going to move. It's the original land grant from the Pueblos of Los Angeles, and it indicates that Rose Hills is within the original land grant lands from the very beginning. Another fact is, 3 neighborhood councils have heard this, not just one. So for other neighbors to come and say that the process has been violated, we've had the Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council hear this, we've had the Arroyo Seco Neighborhood Council hear this, and we've had the LA 32 Neighborhood Council hear this, with plenty of input and public participation. Another thing is we have been using the same identifying marker for over 8,000 years. That individual marker is the rose. In English, we call it rose. In Spanish, it is rosa. And what I learned is in the native Indian language, it's Otsungna. Just like Cahuenga, Topanga, Tahunga, and all the other communities that you hear. Otsungna was a prominent village from years and millennium ago. For the fact as well, about 100 years ago, there are council files indicating that neighbors came to fight for this community of Rose Hills. Go check the archives. I submitted them for the record, and the archives do indicate that council files exist in around 1922. The Maps and Archives Department from the City of Los Angeles, Glenn Creason, also confirms this on city letterhead from the Department of Libraries. And there's many of newspaper clippings dated hundreds of years ago from the LA Times, the Herald Examiner, indicating the existence of Rose Hills. So please honor myself, my fellow neighbors, the youth that were here, the seniors, the parish, and the adjoining communities by honoring the community of Rose Hills. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilman Bernard Parks. My name is Joe Manzano. I reside in the beautiful community of Rose Hills. I believe these two gentlemen said it all. I thank you very much for the positive approach that all the board members here have conducted themselves, our residents here and our young youth. I thank you for going with the motion forward, and for myself and my family, I'm 3rd generation, 4th generation in this beautiful community of the Northeast Los Angeles, Rose Hills community. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask you if we can get those 3 seats, and I can call 3 other people up. Esther Petjar, Raul Salazar Jr. No, ma'am. Ma'am? No, we're going to get you just in a second. Raul Campos. Okay.
Good afternoon, Council Member Bernard Parks. My name is Elena Ching. I reside in the beautiful historic community of Rose Hills for 34 years. But in the beginning, I'm so confused because if somebody asked me where I live, I would just say in between El Sereno and Lincoln Parks, because my area is that by the Soto Bridge. And I'm 90032 zip code, but at the time, it was serviced by District Number 1. So I'm grateful that the remapping and redistricting had made me to District 14, and it's easier to voice my concern. And I'm grateful to the staff of Councilman Jose Huizar, who has been helping us tremendously beautifying our place. And I'm here today, and I invited some of my neighbors to support the motion that was placed to put and restore the community signs that we did have before. Had we known that this will come up, we could have documented it and have some picture. But I know Mr. Anthony Manzano had taken a picture of that sign in 2005, which was taken away. So we just want it restored and put it back in place. And I thank you for listening to us, and hopefully that this will be approved and we will have our signs and be recognized. And when I picked up this flyer from our councilman's office, it says our community is listed. All these communities, our neighboring communities, has their signs, except for Rose Hills. And we do exist. Our school, our community, our church says Our Lady of Guadalupe Rose Hill. There's an old Rose Hill court in the back, and we have a recreation center that says Rose Hill, so we do exist. And thank you very much for listening and for your kind consideration.
Thank you very much. We have Furman Valderrama come up on that seat, and you can start over here.
My name is Raul Campos. I grew up in Rose Hills, too. I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church since kindergarten, and I've always known that as Rose Hills. And like she said, it had the signs before, and now they're not there. So we just want to be recognized as a community, and I thank you for your decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Esther Petjar, and I'm an artist, and I just finished a little mural for Our Lady of Guadalupe School, and on it I put Rose Hills, because it is Rose Hills. I've lived there. I started living there in 1950 in Happy Valley, and we knew at the top of the hill, that part going down over Mercury was Rose Hills. So we knew it then. My grandparents lived, one lived in South LA and one lived right there on East Lake in Lincoln Heights, and they knew our area was Rose Hills. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm sorry that there's so much hostility coming from some of the people in El Sereno. We're neighbors. We're the same race. We're people, and we need to get along to encompass everybody to come together and enjoy our community and our people, and especially using Facebook to call our little area a ghetto. They don't even know the people that live there. So I want people to understand, we're all human, let's get along. Thank you.
Let me ask the next fill up these two seats. Stephen, is it Rishi? And Liliana Ramos.
Yeah, my name is Ross Oliver. I born pretty well raised in Rose Hill, about over 50 years, and I pretty well everybody.
Speak up into that mic because they're going to tape.
Pretty well everybody has said what they unfolded, and I think it's a good thing that we get this proposal done, so all this, like the lady said here, it'll come to an ease. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is Stephen or Liliana here? Stephen?
I'm going to pass now.
Okay. And then also Liliana Ramos? Okay. We'll just put her name in the record. Let me just see if we did Hilda Magnana, Eric Martel, or did Eric already? Tim Miguel. Have people come up to you get started.
Good afternoon, Councilman. My name is, and I said thank you for inviting us. My name is Fermin Valderrama, and I've been in the area since 1960. And I came down and started living there in the same place. And through the years, people ask me, where do you live? Well, I live in such and such address, which is called Rose Hill. It's Rose Hills, and I don't live in Lincoln Heights. I don't live in El Sereno. I live in Rose Hills, and it's a place I have known for years and years. And by the way, our area, if you know, I know you were in the police department, in our area, there's no crime there. It's beautiful people living there, and most of the people, we know each other. You know, my kids went to Rose Hills, Our Lady of Guadalupe Rose Hills School, and I have known people that have been born and raised there, and gone to another places, and they carry the tradition they we have learned there. So why we just have to keep that place, that name? That's all. Thank you for inviting us.
Tim Miguel. I'm with the Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino, the Keach Nation. Ernie Solis is our chief. Andy Solis is our chairman. I'm just here to verify that our village of Asungna has been there. It's a prehistoric village. It's the place of the wild roses. We are the indigenous people. We know this. It's an oral history that has been passed down. I'm just here to verify it.
Okay, thank you.
In Spanish. Buenas tardes, señores. Mi nombre es Hilda Magaña. Yo represento a la comunidad de Rose Hills.
Excuse me, 1 minute.
Somebody speak
Someone that can
Spanish?
interpret?
Intérprete? Antonio? You interpret?
Yes.
Please, sir.
Thank you.
Yo represento a la comunidad de Rose Hills.
Your name?
My name is Hilda Magaña.
Her name's Hilda Magana, and she's here to represent the community of Rose Hills.
Yo tengo 35 años viviendo en esa comunidad
She has 35 years living in the community,
y no sé en qué comunidad estoy.
and she's still not aware of what community she lives in.
Yo pido, por favor,
She's asking in favor
la instalación de los signs de nuestra comunidad de Rose Hill, que es mi comunidad.
now that she knows it's her community, she please ask request for the installation of Rose Hill signs.
Gracias, señores.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Stephen, you passed, and is Liliana still here, or she's gone? Pardon? Okay, is she going to come back in, or does she just want her name in the record? Okay, fine. We're going to move this with the recommendation to support the motion, and so we have an idea when that will come to council.
Richard Williams, City Clerk, I can go ahead and schedule this for probably next Wednesday.
Okay. So thank you very much for coming, and this will, we hope, will be on the council agenda for next Wednesday. We have one card for general public comment. Dorothy Napoleon, come on up.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. For the approval of the item, it will be as amended.
What's that? Yeah, it's amended. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, number 8, in addition to being as amended, we'll accept those, that binder of names.
Okay.
Submitted. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Dorothy Napoleon, and I'm here today. I wanted to find out, I've been living in my area. I live in the 8th District, and I've been living in my home for over 35 years. I wanted to know why they don't have funds set up to repair the alleys. Unfortunately, my home is in the back of an alley, and I've been calling, reporting, and everything else, sending pictures, and all I want is a drain in the alley where the water, when it rains, the water would drain out and go into the street, because what's happening, half of the alley has a drain in it, and the other half do not. So the part that has the drain drains in my part, and the water just settle. So all I want is just a drain. Excuse me?
Is it a dirt alley currently?
Excuse me?
Is your alley a dirt alley, or is it a paved alley? With
It's a paved alley.
Okay.
So the other part of the alley has like concrete with the drain in it, but where I live, it so happened that part, it has that asphalt, and when it rains, it breaks it up. And I've been sending pictures. I have pictures today. I just want a drain put in it, so when it rains, it will just flood all the way out of the alley into the street.
Okay, why don't
So I want to know what.
Well, let me tell you what we can do is that we can get your information. The
Okay.
budget starts July 1st. We'll look at, see what funds are in there for alley repavement. I can tell you that if it's an alley reconstruction where you're saying you want this drain, it may not be at the top of the priority list because there's not that much money for alleys and repavement of alleys. That's a reconstruction where they actually have to put the drain in. So if I can, Lorenzo will get your name and phone number, and tell us again where you live.
Yeah, you want me to tell you now?
Yeah, where do you live?
I live at 9816 South Van Ness Avenue. And that's Los Angeles 90047.
Okay, Lorenzo will get your information, and Christine, who runs...
I have some pictures, too.
Okay, if you get those to him, we'll get it to Christine.
Okay.
And she's the one that sets the priorities for
Okay.
street sidewalks, trees, alleys, and she'll be able to give us a better idea of what and how that, your particular project fits into it.
Yeah, because like I said, I've been in my home for over 35 years, so nothing has been done. So just a
We will
drain.
get back with you, and even if we have to tell you it's going to take a while, we'll get back to you.
Okay.
If you get it to Lorenzo before you leave,
Sure.
we'll get Christine in touch with you.
All right, thank
All right,
you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another general public comment, Yoli Garcia.
Hello again. I just wanted to state for the record that I would like my California public record request to be made within the 10 calendar days in regards to the,
I think if I ask the attorney, do you have to do that in writing?
I could do verbal.
Make it oral. It can be oral.
Okay, so,
Now, is that directed to you, or?
It would be directed to the city clerk.
City clerk?
Are you making a?
okay, so if I could please have all documentation in regards to the boundaries of Rose Hills and also Rose Hill, because historically the area in El Sereno is Rose Hill, not Rose Hills. So any documentation with Rose Hill or Rose Hills.
Okay.
Verifying that it's an official community.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
You should provide your address.
Yes, I will.
Okay, why don't you give it to Mr. Williams, and we'll make sure that he can respond. Okay? There's no other public comments and no other item. We have one more. Thank you. George Garcia, public comment.
Going back to what happened earlier, I could submit this map as evidence of that it's not an NC boundary. It's an official community by Sereno, by Councilman Huizar's office. It's given out. And so I want to request through the Public Records Act exactly when this community was existed, like the historical records that they submitted. Because we've asked that many times in writing to the Councilman's office. We want the evidence that they're presenting so we can review, the community can review it. My wife and I created the El Sereno Historical Society a year ago. Okay, we're online. We know we are in the community doing all kinds of events all the time, and we requested this information. It's never been given to us to share. So another thing is, Anthony Manzano was president of the NC when this motion was presented to the city council. He was president of the NC. He promoted this. He went to the registering meetings and promoted the restructuring of the district in his favor. He went in front. This isn't on tape. I have it online. He went in front of the city council. Again, as NC president, this is NC president. He requested again that this community be recognized.
Okay, but let me ask you this. The point you're making is you want...
The point is that what was done is unethical.
What you're asking us for is freedom of information for what specific item?
For the item of when the item that he gave as evidence the Rose Hills had been an old community of hundreds of years, whatever he claims, the signatures that they presented of the community that members that live in that area supposedly, and also I want to review the laws having to do with the NC president went before the council and before the registration commission requesting that this community be recognized, because he was an NC president of the NC that in El Sereno during that time when he went forward for the city council. So I want to know what that states about, the law states about him, his position doing that.
Anyone could have testified before the redistricting committee. There's no law that prohibits. In fact, the whole process of redistricting is to include the community and get their input. It doesn't limit them because they might be in an office or that they may be in a nonprofit or a variety of things. So that's the whole purpose of redistricting, is to have community input.
But he also owned the business at that time.
It makes no difference. People who live, work, have interest can show up, and it was open meetings for people to discuss what their issues were.
But his statements were the NC supports this. The NC, and this is again, through California's Public Record Act, requested, where's the evidence that the El Sereno Liberal Council supports this redistricting or this?
Okay.
If there's none. So I want to request that also be provided for me under CPRA, the evidence that the El Sereno Liberal Council supports the redistricting of this area and the placement of signs in that area. Because I requested that, he never gave it to us. Again, that's in writing. We have that in writing. Sorry.
On the issues that deal with the testimony before redistricting, would you have access to that?
More than likely, I would have to double check.
Okay. All right. So he's got your specifics.
Can I say one last thing? We submitted in writing letters to the city attorney's office with these issues that we just said right now. and nothing was done about this. There was never a formal investigation of whether or not what was going on, because his dad was also on the NC at the time this was going on. So who do I give that to review that evidence that we have? The videos, and I mean, I know you're saying that it's okay to do that, but he's also on the NC's letterhead as Rose Hills. He's saying it's already community, but the community doesn't think so. Neither does Weezar.
Let me say this, I think you're trying to battle the redistricting issue here.
No, I'm saying I want information about how to get about to bring this to the light.
Yeah, well, we will ask Mr. Williams to do what he can as far as responding, but if you're asking him to get into why the redistricting commission didn't respond to you, I don't know if we have the ability to do that.
City attorney, I never went that route. I just didn't know about it, to tell you the truth.
All right.
Can I submit this to evidence, please? Can I put this into evidence as far as...
You can, yes, give that to Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Oh, okay, you're right.